Mr. Matthew Pennycook.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that time has been found to debate this important and sadly overlooked issue, and I thank the Minister for coming to the House to respond at the end of what I know has been a very long day. Mr. Speaker, until recently, like most of my constituents and most fellow Britons, I knew little of Eritrea, its people or its government. Conditions in the country were brought to my attention a little over a year ago by one of my constituents, Habte Hagos, who among other ventures owns and runs the award-winning Blue Nile restaurant in Woolwich. Like many Eritreans, Habte lost family members in the struggle for a free, democratic Eritrea and has worked over many years to raise awareness about human rights violations in his homeland. And I'm delighted that Habte and others are in the gallery this evening to watch the proceedings. Mr. Speaker, desperate human beings are moving across our continent on a scale not seen since the Second World War. As we know, a significant proportion are fleeing civil war and sectarian violence in Syria, but they also include large numbers of Eritreans leaving the land of their birth in the Horn of Africa. An estimated 5,000 people leave Eritrea every month, and almost as many men, women, and children left that country last year as fled Syria. It is a human exodus that is all the more staggering when you consider that this is a country of just 6 million people and one that is not presently at war. I'm happy to give way to the other movement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for giving way, and I congratulate him on securing such an important debate. I have a number of Eritrean constituents who will welcome this evening's debate, and some of them, I appreciate it's the Foreign Office responding this evening, but a number of them are very concerned about the Home Office country guidance that's used to determine whether or not a asylum status should be granted. Does the member agree with me that that should be updated to take into account the recent findings of the UN Committee on report into human rights in Eritrea, rather than the discredited report by the Danish government on the same matter?
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point. The methodology of that report by the Danish government has been questioned. It's been left by the Danish government as a basis for their guidance, and I think that the government should continue to review its own guidance to ensure that we're not refusing asylum to people who are being genuinely persecuted. Mr. Speaker, most Eritreans that flee end up in neighbouring countries such as Sudan and Ethiopia, but many make the dangerous trek northward towards the Maghreb and the Sinai Peninsula in the hope of finding sanctuary in Europe. In doing so, each must evade capture by their own security forces, who operate a shoot-to-kill policy against those leaving without permission. Violence and extortation at the hands of desert gangs, death from dehydration in the Sahara, detention in Libya or Israel, and the lethal risks of crossing the Mediterranean. What dread leads so many, including not just adults but thousands of unaccompanied minors, to risk everything to leave their homeland behind? Words like tyranny, oppression and cruelty are regularly used to describe conditions within all manner of distasteful regimes across the globe, to the point where sometimes they risk becoming stale with overuse. Yet, if anything, these words fall short when applied to Eritrea under the rule of President Isaias Afwerki. Isaias's Eritrea is regularly described as Africa's North Korea. It's a hackneyed phrase, but in this instance, the comparison is pardonable, because ruthless repression is the norm for those living under the rule of this isolated, hermetic and authoritarian regime. It is a far cry from what so many Eritreans fought for, heroically and for decades, and from the hopes of those who supported the struggle for liberation. Instead of democracy and the rule of law, Eritreans are ruled by a culture of fear and absolute obedience. Fear that they or their classmates will be sent to carry out national service in a remote location for an unknown number of years. Fear that a trusted co-worker who yesterday openly expressed an opinion may not turn up to work tomorrow. Fear that a friend arrested arbitrarily will be incarcerated in a vastly overcrowded metal container or a simple hole dug in the desert ground with little prospect of release. Fear that a disappeared family member will never be seen again. No elections since 1993, no independent press since the government clamped down in 2001, pervasive and ongoing restrictions of all freedoms movement, expression and association, arbitrary arrest with no fair trials or no trials at all, indefinite compulsory military conscription, forced labour and torture, including widespread sexual violence against women and girls. That is the situation in Eritrea today. An extensive and detailed report published in June by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights describes, in horrifying detail, a siege state where control is absolute and where, and I quote, systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations are being committed, violations that Commission felt may constitute crimes against humanity. The crimes that are taking place in Eritrea today add themselves to old but not forgotten and still raw abuses. Politicians, journalists, faith leaders and business owners who once proudly set out to build a prosperous post-independence future for their country, but instead found themselves languishing in one of the country's numerous detention centres or died there, suffering like thousands of ordinary citizens who have been punished for refusing an order, being a member of the wrong religious denomination, or expressing sympathy with the wrong person. I happily give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank you for giving us such permission to do so beforehand. Is the Honourable Member aware that since 2002, when the government effectively banned all but 3 denominations, thousands of Christians from unregistered churches have been arrested and detained indefinitely? Does he share my concerns that 13 years later, not only is the Eritrean government continuing this campaign of arrest, but followers of registered religious communities also suffer maltreatment?
I thank the Honourable Member. I share his concern about the persecution of particular minority groups, including religious groups, and of countless individuals whose names many of us could bring, and many of the Eritreans who I have spoken to could name friends, journalists and others from minorities who've been persecuted. And sadly, the repression has worked. Those that remain in Eritrea dare not speak up for fear of reprisal, while diaspora communities are subtly infiltrated by agents of the state. Those who have fled abroad and who strive still to promote human rights are systematically intimidated. I'm happy to give way.
I thank the member and congratulate him on bringing this really important debate to the Chamber. I just wondered if he would join me in asking the Minister if he will work with his colleagues in the Home Office to offer protection, further protection to those people that he's talking about. I too have a number of Eritrean friends in Glasgow who found that when they tried to campaign against the human rights abuses, that their family members and friends are still suffering in Eritrea. They were infiltrated by government supporters and they were threatened and they were abused, and they're supposed to be here for safety. So I just wonder if you'd join me in asking if there could be further protections for them.
I would certainly join the Honourable Member in doing that. It's not just the family members that still remain in Eritrea, it's the communities, as she says, that live here, that face fragmentation by these agents and abuse, much of which is online by anonymous trolls who target critics using everything from abusive emails to fully fledged death threats. And I've experienced this phenomenon myself in a token way in the lead up to this debate. And if the regime is true to form, I can no doubt expect more of the same in the hours and weeks to come. But it's nothing, and that is the important point, nothing compared to the intimidation experienced by Eritrean dissidents. Intimidation of the diaspora is compounded by exhortation in the form of the so-called rehabilitation tax that the Eritrean government imposes on its countrymen and women living abroad. This 2% tax on the income of Eritrean emigres is a diminishing but still important source of revenue for the regime. The previous coalition government rightly voted in favour of UN Resolution 222023 that condemned the tax and called on all states to ensure that it ceased. Other countries have taken robust steps to enforce that resolution. In May, the Canadian government expelled the Eritrean Consulate General in Toronto for continuing to levy the tax. Yet there are credible reports that collection of this tax continues unabated in the UK. And I'd like assurances from the Minister that the collection of the 2% tax on Eritreans living in the UK has ended, or if he cannot give that assurance, can he outline what steps the government plan to make sure that it is? Mr. Speaker, beyond the narrow issue of the rehabilitation tax, I'd like to touch on 3 distinct issues that I hope the Minister will be able to respond to and to influence. The first is the Ethiopian-Eritrean border dispute. In December 2000, a comprehensive peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea was signed in Algiers, ending a 2-year border war. The Algiers Agreement established a boundary commission to demarcate the border. Both countries agreed to accept the Commission's decision as final. But when the details were published in April 2002, Ethiopia disputed the findings. The unresolved border tension remains a source of regional instability. It is also a very real grievance in Eritrea, and one that is used by the regime to justify keeping the country on a permanent emergency military footing. Can the Minister therefore outline what recent steps the UK government have taken, bilaterally with key regional and international partners and through the UN system, to help overcome the current stalemate and ensure the Algiers Agreement is adhered to by both sides? The second issue I'd like to raise is sanctions. As the Minister knows, a UN and EU arms embargo is in force on Eritrea. In addition, there is also a travel ban and an asset freeze imposed on listed individuals deemed a threat to peace and the national reconciliation process. In the past, the UN has toughened sanctions on the regime by requiring foreign companies involved in Eritrea's mining industry to ensure that funds from the sector are not used to destabilise the region. If the government accepts, as I hope the Minister will confirm it does, that the mass exodus of people from Eritrea is a reaction, in large part, to human rights abuses taking place there, then surely there is a case for considering a toughening of sanctions against the regime to deny it the means to persecute its people and thereby destabilise the region. Can the Minister let us know what consideration the government have given to widening sanctions against the Eritrean government? Specifically, can he let the House know whether he agrees with me that given the severity of the human rights abuses in Eritrea and their impact on regional stability, that there is a convincing case for an expansion of targeted sanctions on those mining projects in Eritrea in which the Afwerki government has a significant stake and that provide the regime with much needed foreign exchange? The third and final issue I'd like to raise is EU development aid. The EU has responded to the flood of Eritreans fleeing their homeland by offering hundreds of millions in development aid in return from assurances from the government that it will address the social and economic exclusion that it is adamant are the root causes of irregular migration and human trafficking. In doing so, Europe has, at best, given the impression that it believes that a lack of economic opportunity is the root cause of the population outflow, rather than repression. At worst, I believe it risks the perception that the European Union would be content to see human rights abuses continue in the country if only the regime would stem the growing tide of Eritreans heading towards this continent. Money will not alter the simple fact that repression, rather than economic prospects, are the main driver of migration from Eritrea. In any case, money and the appalling human rights abuses that have been documented by the UN are inextricably interlinked, because Eritrea's economy now is almost completely dominated by the state and the ruling PFDJ party. In such circumstances, aid will simply entrench the regime. The Minister will know that aid to Eritrea under the European Union budget will have to take account of the country's human rights record under the terms of the Cotonou Agreement. But can the Minister reassure the House that demonstrable proof of improvements in the human rights situation in the country will be an absolute prerequisite to the release of any EU development funding for Eritrea? Mr. Speaker, Eritreans have been and are being terrorised and oppressed by their own government. The hermetic seal that the regime has attempted to enforce is well and truly broken. Eritreans are fleeing persecution at the hands of their rulers in record numbers, and they will not stop until meaningful progress on human rights in their homeland is underway. If there is one thing that history teaches us, it is that the struggle against the totalitarian mindset is an endless one that has to be fought and refought in every generation. Eritrea is a central battleground in that conflict in our generation. Our own national interest, as well as our credentials as a bastion of human rights, demand that we give the victims of the Afwerki regime not only our solidarity, but also clear and unequivocal support to alleviate the very real suffering they face.
Here. The Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Mr David Liddington, to reply.
Mr Speaker, can I first congratulate the Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Greenwich and Woolwich, for securing this timely debate and also on the way he spoke with such eloquence and passion on this matter. It's a timely debate because later this week, as the House will know, both European and African leaders will gather in Malta to discuss how we can work together to reduce the numbers of people risking their lives in perilous journeys across the Mediterranean. And this year alone, more than 32,000 Eritreans have made that crossing, and others have lost their lives in the attempt. More Eritreans still are living in refugee camps in Ethiopia and in Sudan. So the question has to be, as the Honourable Gentleman asked, why are so many leaving and what can be done about improving the situation within Eritrea? Now, certainly a large part of the answer is, as the Honourable Gentleman argued, about human rights. And the government, like the Honourable Gentleman and others who've spoken this evening, is well aware of the shockingly bad human rights record of the government of Eritrea. That is why the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's most recent human rights report listed Eritrea as a priority country and made clear that its government fell short of its international human rights commitments. And I could give the House a very long list, but I will confine myself, because of the time constraint, simply to say we have concerns about allegations, for example, of widespread arbitrary detention, about shortcomings in the rule of law, and a lack of respect for fundamental human freedoms. We were also troubled by the United Nations Commission of Inquiry's findings that widespread human rights violations had been committed in Eritrea. And it's unfortunate that the Commission itself has so far been unable to visit Eritrea to see the situation firsthand. In July this year, at the United Nations Human Rights Council, the United Kingdom supported an extension of the Commission's mandate so that it could further investigate these allegations. And we've made it clear to the government of Eritrea that it must cooperate with the UN Commission, including them being allowed to visit Eritrea to see matters for themselves, and to cooperate also with other UN human rights bodies.
Thank the Minister for giving way. I want to have it on answered, Mr Speaker, if I can, please. This year marks the 8th anniversary of the illegal removal of Patriarch Antonius from his position as head of the Eritrean Orthodox Church, the country's largest religious community. Does he agree that it is unacceptable that the Patriarch, an octogenarian with severe diabetes, remains under house arrest since 2007?
Yes, I do, and I hope that the attention that the Honourable Member for Strangford has drawn to this case may be noticed in the Eritrean Embassy, and that there will be some relenting on the position that the government has adopted hitherto. Both at the UN Human Rights Council and in our bilateral discussions, the British government has set out very clearly to the Eritrean authorities the other steps we believe that country needs to take to improve its human rights record. Those include expecting the government of Eritrea committing to do something as apparently straightforward as implementing its own constitution, to release all those who have been arbitrarily detained, and to hold responsible those people who ought to be accountable for various violations and abuses of human rights. And those are matters that we shall continue to press upon the Eritrean authorities, both bilaterally and through our multinational work in Europe and elsewhere. But alongside the very real concerns that I think everyone in the House this evening shares, we shouldn't ignore any signs, even small ones, of progress. I do welcome the fact that Eritrea took part in the UN Universal Periodic Review process at the Human Rights Council, and also in Article 8 dialogue with the EU. Last year, Eritrea ratified the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and voted in favour of a global moratorium on the use of the death penalty. I also welcome their cooperation in efforts to tackle the human trafficking and smuggling that puts people's lives at risk. Now, these are indeed small steps, but they are steps in the right direction. The test now is for the Eritrean government to follow through on these commitments with concrete action to improve the human rights situation on the ground, and the onus is on Eritrea's government to demonstrate progress. A key part of that action should be to amend Eritrea's system of indefinite national service. A system without a clear end date does drive many young people to leave that country, and this needs to change. I welcome the fact that earlier this year the Eritrean government made a public pledge to limit national service to 18 months. But ministers here have been very clear in talking to the government in Asmara that simply for Eritrean officials or ministers to make that pledge in Europe is not enough. This commitment needs to be publicised widely within Eritrea itself, and it should apply to all conscripts and not just those who have been enlisted recently. But as the House knows, the challenges ordinary Eritreans face are not around human rights alone. They're also around a lack of economic opportunity. Eritrea is facing the effects of the El Niño weather phenomenon, which is now causing severe food insecurity across many parts of Africa. And many young Eritreans leave the country because they have no job and no hope of finding one to support themselves and their families. And I think the truth is that while we will all continue to work assiduously for an improvement in human rights in Eritrea, the fact will remain that if an educated young man in Asmara were to see his human rights situation improve but still be unable to find work to support his family, he might yet feel compelled to leave and put his life in the hands of unscrupulous criminal gangs that profit from people's desperation. Now, the honourable gentleman for, I think, Glasgow North raised the question of the Home Office's approach to asylum policy. In this country, we have a proud history of granting protection to those who need it. All asylum claims are carefully considered on their individual merits in accordance with our international obligations, and particularly the 1951 United Nations Convention. The Home Office's country guidance on handling Eritrean asylum claims was updated in September this year. It recognises that there are indeed persistent human rights abuses in Eritrea, but stresses also the need to consider each claim on its individual merits. We take those international responsibilities seriously and grant protection to those Eritreans in genuine need. Now, the honourable member for Greenwich and Woolwich raised a number of specific questions. I will try to provide him with answers to those. He asked about the imposition of the expatriate tax. Now, the levy of a tax on nationals living in a foreign country is not in itself illegal, and in fact many countries around the world do this. What the UN resolution made clear was that using coercive measures to try to collect such a tax would be illegal. And we have made it clear to the Eritrean embassy in London that coercive measures will not be accepted in the United Kingdom, and we would urge any cases of this to be reported to the relevant police force without delay so that an investigation can be made and action taken. He also asked me about the issue of increased development assistance to Eritrea, including through the EU's EDF 11 fund. Now, that fund is still under discussion, and I completely understand the reasons behind the honourable gentleman's concerns. But at the same time, we're facing the reality that Eritrea is one of the poorest countries anywhere in the world, and I think there is scope to help improve and save the lives of Eritrean people. For example, Eritrea has begun to make some progress towards the health outcomes embodied in the Millennium Development Goals, and that is something which I think we should bear in mind when we consider the pros and cons of a particular aid measure. Aid does not mean providing funding to the government of Eritrea. Greater EU assistance could, for example, be provided through United Nations agencies and international NGOs, and I can give a commitment that any further DFID assistance would be carefully assessed against Eritrea's commitment to its partnership principles, including on civil and political rights.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'd just press him on how we can know, in a regime where there is no financial accountability, which doesn't let international observers in, that any development aid will be spent on health outcomes, on economic outcomes, rather than lining the pockets of party officials or the regime supporters?
That is precisely why the aid, I think, is often best spent via reputable international agencies and NGOs that have a track record of ensuring that help goes to those who are genuinely in need and who shout very loudly if the government of the recipient country tries to interfere in that progress. And the Honourable Gentleman referred in his speech to the Cotonou Agreement, and I've certainly, in my time in ministerial office, approved a United Kingdom position of the Council of Ministers where we have supported the suspension of Cotonou Agreement measures to more than one African country because of the abuses of human rights or suspension of the rule of law in those countries, so that those disciplines are available, as he said, within the system that the EU deploys. He also talked about the UN arms embargo. Last month, in Resolution 2244, the Security Council noted that during the course of its current and previous mandates, the Sanctions Monitoring Group had not found any evidence of the government of Eritrea supporting al-Shabaab, and I welcome that. But the resolution was also clear on what Eritrea needed to do if it wanted a serious discussion on the overall appropriateness of sanctions, and that is deepen their engagement with the monitoring group and facilitate the monitoring group's entry into Eritrea. I have to confess, not at the moment persuaded by what the Honourable Gentleman urged in respect of mining companies, although I will report what he said back to my colleagues in DFID and my colleagues in the Foreign Office, because those mining companies, despite all the problems there are in Eritrea, do provide one of the few sources of employment for people in that country. And so it may be a matter of weighing up our wish to penalise the government against the fact that we might inadvertently penalise the people who themselves are suffering.
Just very quickly, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to put on record that there have been documented instances in more than one mine of forced labour and that compulsory military conscription being used in the mine. So it's not a process of, an international mining company going in there in a legitimate way. These sites have been the sites of some of the abuses that I've talked about.
Well, I will write to him after the debate with chapter and verse, but the advice I have received is that Tevson, which is the leading international mining company in Eritrea, has a very firm policy of refusing to accept onto its workforce people that have been conscripted in the way that he described. And undoubtedly the Eritrean government has tried to use conscripted labour in mines at various times. Finally, he mentioned the ongoing border dispute between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and I agree this needs to be resolved and that responsibility for that lies with the two countries concerned. We will continue to encourage, both bilaterally and through the European Union, Eritrea and Ethiopia alike to talk to each other and to engage through the various appropriate international fora to overcome the current stalemate. We hope that progress can be made towards demarcation in accordance with the decision of the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission. So overall, Mr. Speaker, while there's been some very limited progress, there is a great deal more that the government of Eritrea needs to do to tackle human rights abuses. And the problems of Eritrea are all interlinked. Eritrea cannot fulfil its potential without genuine respect for human rights. Efforts to improve economic opportunities in Eritrea go hand in hand with improvements on human rights and in the rule of law. We will continue not only to monitor the situation closely, but will seek always to support improvements in both our bilateral and multilateral work. It is by being clear and firm on the need for change, and also in being clear about the advantages to Eritrea and its people of making that change, that we stand the best chance of securing some improvement in the lives of ordinary people living in Eritrea. And that, I hope and believe, is a goal that all honourable members in the House tonight will share.
Order.